So in this material section, we're going to be talking a bit about concrete and utilizing Photoshop to manage some maps and be able to go back. So rather than remapping everything in Maya, I am going to go ahead and actually do a little bit of painting and utilize Photoshop a bit and also utilize a bit of Crazy Bump. Just so you know, Crazy Bump, if you haven't seen it before, let me pull it up here. So Crazy Bump is a old software, been around a long time, but I do find myself still utilizing it because of how simple it is and easy to use. So I can go ahead and open a file here. And let me get that on here. Here we go. So the thing I always find myself going back to Photoshop for, or to Crazy Bump for, is just really the ease of use. With Substance Designer coming into the picture now, I may stop using Crazy Bump a little bit more, but again, ease of use is a pretty big thing, so I'm going to go ahead and try it out. So you can open up your file, and it gives you the option to choose what you feel the normal map is looking like. So this is kind of a rough representation of the shadows, the way they'd be casting. And so with this, you can see, you know, I do kind of see these bumps in here would be casting shadows. I'm going to choose this one on the right. And Crazy Bump here gives us a nice little preview. And for something like concrete in particular, this is just going to generate a normal map for me. You can also go into the diffuse section and you can do things like remove shading. Again, on the concrete, this isn't going to do that much because this is already actually a really beautiful photograph. But removing highlights can be kind of nice. You can see it just really kind of neutralized some of the detail that was in there. And there's also this little color correction slider, which just kind of juices up the contrast and levels. So if you want to use that stuff, you can. The real benefit from Crazy Bump really comes from the normal generation here, just because of how quick it is. So right off the bat, you can see this is looking very lumpy. So I'm going to really, I'm just going to kill my shape recognition, kill my very large detail, and you can see now that this is actually feeling a little bit better. You can see I can pull that fine detail up a little bit, and now I'm really pulling out, you know, I don't really need a ton of information on something like concrete. I really only need these little tiny scratches and dings and stuff like that. And so now you can see over here, it's like it's starting to catch the little tiny pocks and holes, and that's looking pretty cool. Depending on what you're doing, you may still want a little bit of large detail. You know, you can see that's starting to pull out some of the larger bits. But things like shape recognition and very large detail are really only necessary with textures like rocks and that kind of thing, where there are really large shapes for it to grab onto. I really just want a tileable bump map almost to information from the normal. You can always increase the intensity a little bit if you want. I find that V-Ray tends to be, the normal maps tend to be a little softer than how they display here, so I am going to keep that a little bit higher. You can also choose to sharpen it a little bit if you need to. Again, totally up to you. I always just kind of try and look at the shader over here, and you can see if I right click, I can move the light around, which is pretty cool as well. So I am going to actually dial some of these pieces down a little bit. So I really just want that fine texture detail across the top, because this is, you know, it's like a polished concrete floor. I don't need anything too crazy. Cool, so you can just save, and I can just say copy normals to clipboard, and it'll just copy it over to my clipboard for me, and then I can just paste that right into Photoshop. And I can start getting this organized a bit. And my background, I'm just going to double click that, turn it into a layer, and we'll just group that. Cool. So I am just going to duplicate my layer here for diffuse. And actually, we will just, for our spec map here, sometimes you can even get away with just tucking some adjustment layers inside of these folders. So, you know, for your specular, I could even colorize this just to give a little bit of a tinge of blue if I want to. Maybe I don't even need to colorize it. Maybe I can just make it kind of blue. Something like that could be kind of nice. And then now pull way back on that. I don't even know if those adjustments will really come through on the video, but they definitely were feeling nice. Cool. And, you know, now I can, if I look at this, actually, the dark areas on this texture almost feel like what I want the shinier bits to be. And I really want you to think about that when you're looking at textures like this. You really have to be really conscious of what you're painting and what you're creating. In this case, you know, I'm really looking at what I want my shiny specular area to be. And I see these drips that are a little bit darker. I kind of see this stain here. And I think it would be really nice if those areas gleamed a little bit brighter. So I'm actually going to try just putting an invert on this. And then I can also throw levels up here. And I'm just going to try pushing and pulling the levels around to see if I can isolate that detail. And I wanted it to be a little bit blue tinted. There we go. I think my invert screwed it up, probably. Makes sense. And yeah, so that's feeling kind of cool. And so you really have a lot of options. So something like concrete, you know, it's always good to look at reference. Definitely good to look at reference, but you can kind of see this may be a little noisy, but I can try it out. I can remap it on the Maya side still, as long as I am not clipping any of this out. And you can see actually it just so happened that my sliders did fall kind of nicely on either side. But you know, this kind of gamma correction that I just did here, I could actually do on the Maya side still. But I'm just going to keep it right in there. Cool. I have hesitations about this normal map. It does feel a little intense, but we'll see. So let's go ahead and get this all saved out. So this was just going to be concrete, and I actually, my window got stuck there. There we go. So first let's save out our PSD. And notice how the PSD is pretty organized here. Good to go. Organization, always key. And now we can save out our individual files here. So we'll go ahead and start. We've got our normal. And that's all good to go. I do want to discard my layers and save a copy. And then my specular is next. So again, TIFF as copy, don't need any of that. And there we go. And lastly, my diffuse. And you know, you can go in and do some modifications to the diffuse if you want. I'm just going to go ahead and save it out as a TIFF so that it's in the same naming convention and everything. Discard layers, and there we go. So now let's try and get this hooked up on the Maya side. Cool, so empty shader, this is saved out to material types concrete. So I'm just going to grab my 3 pieces here, and we'll assign a new V-Ray material. And we'll bring in our 3 file textures. I am just going to duplicate this 3 times and control middle click drag my placement node so that they're all together. And we'll grab our diffuse first. Move on over to our normals. And then our specular. So just get these plugged right in. So diffuse. This is our specular here. Yep. So that's going to go in our reflection color. I also may want to, so let's refresh this swatch here. And this one as well. So these are coming in 8-bit form. If if I look at this, this is going into a color swatch and going to be displayed in my render view. So I do want to add a texture input gamma to gamma correct that. Same thing with my reflection. The normals, I do not want to do that because that's just going into the bump section and that's needs to be in its linear form. Don't need any correction on that. And we'll say normals in tangent space. And my reflection here, I can dial that glossiness around a little bit, but I may want to try mapping that. But I'm going to do that in the actual render with my IPR running. So we'll get that going. I jumped right from the glass into the concrete, so you can see that leftover there. Cool. So that's looking pretty interesting. It feels a little dry right now, and so this is where I can get in and start modifying my shader a bit. So let's first see what happens if I crank this Fresnel up a bit to get it a little shinier. And let's also look at my reflection pass. Okay, so I think my spec map might be a little dark. And I'm going to bring my Fresnel back down. I don't really need it to be that high, but let's actually go in. And so now I have some options. And there's no right or wrong to this. It's really up to you as for your own workflow. You can either choose to remap this in Maya, or if you want to keep it all on the Photoshop side, you can go in and, you can modify this over here. So I could clamp my levels, bring everything up quite a bit like that, or I could even adjust my gamma. I could see what that looks like. And I could save that out, or I can go in and I can simply do that on the Maya side. I can use a remap at HSV node to remap it. I can also go in and do insert color remap. Tons of ways to do this. In this situation, I'm going to do the remap HSV, and I'm just going to drag that value across to brighten it up, because I want to maintain that color. That's why I chose to do that. If I do a remap, I'm going to have to refigure out that blue color that I had. And cool. So I could also go ahead and see what this looks like in the other lighting situations. This world is so soft, it might be a little deceptive. So let's go ahead, and I think the sun and sky is so much of a contrast to this one. That's a nice one to look at. So see here you can definitely feel that reflection, but overall, not quite sure how I'm feeling about it. It still feels a little bit strange to me. So I'm going to go and I'm actually going to start playing with this specular a bit. I'm actually going to set it to GGX, and I'm going to expand this GGX tail. Oops, sorry, other way. There we go. So it's a little bit softer, and now I can potentially lower that down. And I really want to look at my specular while I'm doing this. So you can see what the GGX tail does. So if I raise it, it's going to brighten that kind of ping. And see, now I'm actually exposing some of that. Oops, didn't really mean to rotate it like that, but it's good to see it. Kind of interesting. For just kind of nice dry concrete, this is starting to work pretty good. I can tile this a little bit as well. And I can always go in and I can really keep cranking that value however I need to if I want it more reflective. If I want it to feel wet or darker, then I can go in and actually layer in a different version of the shader over top of it. So I can lower the diffuse a bit. And we can go in and create a V-Ray blend. And this you have some options. So you can simply add an additional specular over top, or you can blend two of the same shaders with different speculars. So let me show you what I mean. So I'm actually going to say duplicate special and duplicate input connections. Cool. So we've got two versions of this shader. So first, let's just on this new shader, I'm actually going to just kind of kill the bump map here. And I'm going to also kill my reflection map. And I really want this to just have a really sharp, wet specular. So something like that. So now it's almost feeling like a nice polished concrete. And, you know, you could have a little darker diffuse on this one if you want. Again, I can modify this GGX tail a little bit as I need to until I'm happy with this. So that's feeling kind of cool. I can also raise the Fresnel a tiny bit more if there's, you know, if this is wet or lacquered, that'll be a little bit different. I'm going to kind of go for a wet, so I'm actually going to lower that amount down. And maybe we will, let's try reconnecting that normal map. And we'll set that to normal map in tangent space. So I am just going to lower that intensity. This is a new V-Ray feature, by the way, that you can just dial normal maps with this bump multiplier here. So that's feeling pretty nice and glossy. I could even go in and duplicate my remap HSV. I could have a different version of this spec here, so I can raise my black point. Let's get this mapped in. So this is, the saturation now is feeling pretty bizarre to me. So rather than the remap HSV, I think I'm going to just duplicate this whole file texture, and I'm just going to keep it as a color remap. Because I want to be able to see what I'm doing in the swatch here. Because see, now I can get in here, and I'm going to bring my black point up a bit. I also want to, before I forget, turn off my texture input. Oh no, sorry, I don't want to do that. So leave that turned on because this is going in color swatch. And I'm really just going to be looking here while I dial this, but I can bring this pretty far in. And I can still have some areas where it's a little clamped down. So that's kind of cool. So now we're starting to get, so if I look at my reflection here, well, actually, maybe something in there. I actually like that better. I think the brighter values are pretty cool. And now I can see how that looks. So it's feeling pretty shiny. I can crank that Fresnel up a little bit if I want to feel a little bit glossier. Cool. So now let's put these together. So I've got a kind of nest of shader balls over here. So I can blend these just literally one over the other. So I can have my base material. So let's connect this to my main shading group here. So this is my dry concrete. And I can layer this over top. And now I'm getting two layers of specular across this. If I look at my reflection, I'm getting some of that bright reflection, whereas before this was my pure dry and this was the pure wet shader. But I kind of like just being able to blend these two together. And you may be asking why I didn't just simply use the additive mode. And the reason I didn't use the additive mode is because that kind of kills the energy conserving nature of the shaders. And I do like going in and being able to still maintain those values. And you could even, this darker version over here, I could really darken that down. And I could even have a map that holds them out. So let's create a file texture. We'll just grab one of our grunge textures that we've got in our little library here. So something that makes sense. So this one could be cool. And I'm just going to insert color remap. Yet again, I'm sure you guys are getting the idea here. So let's clamp that down, bring our whites up. Maybe we'll leave the whites over there. And we'll map that in. And now, so that's interesting. It feels a little patchy to me. So we want to modify this a bit. So maybe I want to ease off some of those blacks so it's a little bit softer of a transition here. And I think I want to bring back some of my diffuse color so it's not so harsh. I think it could be nice to assign this concrete shader to the ground as well, since it's kind of a ground type shader anyways. See what that looks like. Could be kind of interesting. The UVs are going to be totally different, so we'll have to see, but kind of cool. It definitely has that wet feeling to it. I feel like the diffuse is a bit dark though. It's a very dark concrete right now. So I can go in here and modify that a little bit. So my wet concrete here. Sorry, this is my dry concrete. So let's brighten that one up a bit. And then on our wet concrete, I want to bring that up quite a bit too, because it just feels a little intense. That's kind of cool. You can really see the way that specular reacts. Actually, you can see the specular kind of nicer when it's on a flat plane like this. So let's get this tiled a little bit. I think I tiled it too much. Let's go down here. Try 4 and 4. Now that I have it laid out like this, I'm noticing some issues. So I think having the spec map on the dry is working, but on the wet, I need to modify the way this is working a bit. So anywhere the wet shader is coming through, so I should probably get these labeled as well. So this is my dry concrete. And then the wet concrete. So the wet concrete has the much sharper spec and overall, a lot less going on. So let's look at the dry concrete. I'm actually going to try just setting that back to Blinn. And I really just want to tone down the specular and maybe even modify this value curve a bit. The other thing I want to do is try and figure out exactly where each one is falling. So if I look at this reflection, I'm not sure which shader is which right now. And so I need to break the connection on my, let's go over to the lighting. I'm just going to make one of these green. Interesting. So this is actually the wet concrete. So I have a lot more wet concrete right now than dry. So I think I want to invert this. And also having a texture that felt a little bit more like puddles would be helpful as well, but we're going to work with this for right now. So that's kind of cool. Let's look at our beauty. And now we can reconnect that concrete color. So now we're actually getting specific areas that are reflecting the sharper concrete. So you can see, we get these areas of darkness. So I could even, maybe now I can get away with having that dark concrete, the diffuse being a little bit darker so that it feels wetter. Maybe not that dark. And so it's really just about experimenting and playing around with it at this point. I could paint a really solid white blob and actually create a little puddle somewhere if I wanted to, just by simply modifying these shaders a little bit. So kind of an interesting texture that we created. The idea of a lot of these is how you can go about using these textures and creating some shaders without simply relying on something like, a Substance Painter preset. And we're going to get to Substance Painter presets a little bit later when we start texturing the bird. But, I want to definitely have a lot of this kind of content in this video where you can really get in and see, how you can really utilize these nodes purely in Maya and get some really interesting effects. So definitely keep playing around with this stuff, and we'll do a couple more material types here.